Every excavation begins with a question, a disturbance in the historical record, a whisper from the past that demands to be heard. Most of the time, the ground offers up its secrets slowly, reluctantly, a fragment of pottery, a shard of bone, the faint outline of a forgotten foundation. These are the familiar echoes of lives lived, the scattered remnants of time and chance. We had spent weeks on this site, a location flagged for its unusual geological survey data, but which had so far yielded nothing but sterile earth and the quiet hum of our own equipment. It was, by all accounts, a routine dig, another day of patient, methodical work, sifting through the silence of millennia. We were searching for the expected, the known quantities of history, but the earth, it turned out, had been keeping a different kind of secret. One that didn't belong to the slow, meandering story of geology or the chaotic narrative of human settlement. It started with a sound, a subtle change in the texture of the soil under the blade, a faint, almost imperceptible resistance where there should have been none, a single point of order in a world of natural chaos. And then a line, not a crack from a drying riverbed or the trace of a long-decayed root. This was a line of intention, straight, unwavering, a geometric absolute in a world of organic forms. It was the first whisper that something was wrong. The first indication that the story we were uncovering was not one of accident, but of design. In our field, we are trained to recognize the hand of man, the curve of a pot, the napped edge of a flint tool. But this was different. It was too perfect, too deliberate. It felt less like an artifact and more like a statement, a boundary drawn in the dirt. The initial excitement of discovery was quickly tempered by a growing sense of unease. Things that are lost are scattered by the winds of time. They are broken, tumbled, and eventually reclaimed by the earth in a chaotic embrace. They do not announce themselves with perfect geometry. This object wasn't lost. It was buried. The distinction is critical. To be lost is an accident. To be buried is an act. It implies a purpose, a decision made by a thinking mind. Someone, at some point in the distant past, had dug this hole. They had placed this object within it, and they had covered it back over. The act of burial is a fundamentally human one. We bury our dead. We bury our treasures. We bury our secrets. The question, then, was no longer we had found, but of these it was. The precision of the act was staggering. The trench walls around the object were not the sloped, uneven sides of a hastily dug pit. They were vertical, clean, as if cut by a machine. Every movement we made was now charged with a new significance. We were no longer just archaeologists. We were detectives, following a trail of cold, hard evidence left by an unknown party for an unknown reason. On purpose. Two words that recontextualized everything. Every scoop of dirt, every measurement, every photograph. The entire site was no longer a passive record of the past. It was an active construction. A scene deliberately set. And that changed everything. Our protocols shifted. The pace of the excavation slowed to a crawl. Every grain of soil was now a potential clue. Every layer of sediment, a sentence in a language we were just beginning to understand. The focus was no longer on the object itself, but on the context of its burial. The how, the when, and the most pressing question of all, the why. We had to assume that the person or people who buried this object did so with the same level of care and precision that we were now applying to its excavation. We were, in a sense, retracing their steps, undoing their work, and we had to consider the possibility that they did not want their work to be undone. The ground told us how. Before we even touched the object again, we analyzed its tomb. The evidence was overwhelming. The dimensions of the pit were exact to the centimeter. The orientation was aligned with almost perfect magnetic north. This wasn't a hole dug in a hurry. This was architecture, subterranean architecture. The people who did this were not primitive. They were sophisticated. They had tools for measurement, for alignment. They understood geometry. They understood engineering, and they applied that understanding to the simple act of digging a hole in the ground. It was this very over-engineering that was so alarming. The level of effort was wildly disproportionate to the simple act of hiding something. It spoke not just of a desire to hide, but of a need to secure, to make permanent, because the soil around it was not soil, not in the natural sense. Geologically, soil deposition is a chaotic process. Layers are mixed by water, by wind, by the burrowing of animals and the growth of roots. They are uneven, heterogeneous, a story written in a messy, sprawling hand. But these layers were different. They were unnaturally uniform. Each stratum was distinct, separated by a razor-thin line from the one above and below it. The density was wrong, far too high. Our soil density probes returned readings that were off the charts, values you would expect to see in engineered landfill or the foundation of a modern skyscraper, not in a remote, untouched field. These layers weren't natural. They were packed by hand, or by a machine that mimicked the action of a hand. Each layer of backfill had been added, then tamped down with immense, uniform force before the next was applied. This process, known as mechanical compaction, removes air and water, locking the soil particles together into a dense, stable mass. It's a technique used to prevent subsidence, to create a stable foundation. But here, it was used to create a tomb, a solid block of earth, almost as dense as concrete, encasing the object at its heart. There were no signs of biological activity, no wormholes, no root systems. The soil was sterile, dead. This was the first sign, the first undeniable piece of evidence that we were dealing with something far outside the normal bounds of archaeology. This was not a burial. It was an interment, not natural, not random. Every detail was a deliberate choice. The selection of the fill material, the method of compaction, the precise geometry of the pit. It all pointed to a singular, focused intelligence. Someone wanted it hidden. But the evidence suggested more than that. The sheer effort involved went beyond simple concealment. You don't build a fortress of compacted earth just to keep something out of sight. You do it to keep it in place, to ensure it doesn't move, to isolate it from the surrounding environment. The feeling in the pit changed. The quiet curiosity was replaced by a palpable tension. We were no longer simply uncovering a secret. We were approaching a boundary, a line that someone, long ago, had drawn for a very good reason. Then we hit the second sign, a cover. A protective layer of flat, dense stones fitted together like a jigsaw puzzle to form a solid cap. It wasn't a random pile of rocks thrown into a hole. It was a constructed barrier, a shield. This was the layer that produced the initial sound, the resistance our tools first met. The stones were not native to the local geology. They had been brought here, shaped, and placed with purpose. And protected. The word echoed in the silence of the dig site. This object wasn't just hidden, it was being guarded. The layers of compacted earth were the first line of defense. This stone cap was the second. The level of paranoia was breathtaking. What could possibly warrant this level of protection? What secret was so important or so dangerous that it required a multi-layered engineered tomb in the middle of nowhere? So we scanned it. Our ground-penetrating radar, usually so adept at finding voids and inconsistencies, was almost useless against the compacted earth. But our magnetic and gravimetric sensors told a different story. There was something underneath the stone cap, something with significant mass and a uniform, non-ferrous composition. The signal was unnaturally stable. It didn't drift or fluctuate as we moved the sensors. It locked. As if the object was actively asserting its presence, a single, pure note in a symphony of terrestrial noise. That's when we knew this wasn't something the Earth made. It wasn't a meteorite or a unique mineral deposit. The stability of the signal, combined with the engineered nature of its burial, pointed to one inescapable conclusion. It was artificial, man-made, or at least made by some form of intelligence. Every clue pointed to one word: intentional. The location, the depth, the orientation, the compaction, the barrier, the object itself. Nothing was left to chance. It was a chain of evidence, each link forged with deliberation and purpose. And as we carefully removed the stone cap, we found yet another layer, a thin, dark membrane, almost like woven metal mesh resting directly on the object. A third barrier. It was built to stay buried. The complexity of the burial system was astounding. It was a nested doll of protection, each layer designed to resist time, nature, and discovery. But then, something changed. The scanner started to glitch. The stable, locked signal vanished, replaced by a burst of what we initially thought was interference. But it wasn't noise, it was a pattern, a repeating sequence of pulses, faint, but undeniable. And patterns mean design. They mean information. The object wasn't just sitting there, passive and inert. It was active. It was broadcasting something. Or perhaps, it was responding to us. Responding to our proximity, to our scanners. The implications were chilling. We had crossed a threshold. We were no longer just observing. We were interacting. The excavation site, once a place of quiet discovery, now felt like a cage we were rattling, and we had no idea what was inside. So we stopped. We asked one question. Why? Why go to all this trouble? Why create a multi-layered engineered tomb aligned with magnetic precision only to place an active broadcasting object inside it? The two facts seemed contradictory. You don't put a lighthouse in a locked box, unless the light isn't a beacon, unless it's a warning. We re-examined the soil, this time looking for chemical traces. And we found it. A dark, discolored band in the earth. A perimeter stain that perfectly encircled the entire burial pit. A chemical signature that didn't match anything in our geological database. It was another barrier, an invisible one. The final clue that explained the why. Containment. Not protection. Not preservation. Containment. The word reframed everything once more. This wasn't a treasure chest. It was a prison. The layers weren't there to keep people out. They were there to keep something in. This wasn't a secret to be kept. It was a danger to be isolated. Not treasure. A warning. A message, written in the language of engineering and geology, left by a culture with a profound, terrifying understanding of what they were burying. A message that said, simply, stay away. The moment we understood why, we stopped digging. The decision was immediate and unanimous. We covered it again. We reversed our own process, meticulously rebuilding the prison we had so carefully dismantled. We replaced the stone cap. We backfilled the pit, compacting the earth as best we could, trying to honor the original builder's intent. We were not equipped to deal with this. Our purpose is to understand the past, not to unleash it. Some doors are not meant to be opened. Some secrets are meant to be kept. We removed the location from all public records. We redacted the coordinates from our own logs, replacing them with a classified designation. The site, for all official purposes, no longer exists. Because this wasn't buried by accident. It was buried to stay buried. And the worst part? As we were shutting down our equipment for the final time, the long-range deep scan array flagged two more signals. Fainter, deeper, but with the same unmistakable signature. The same pattern, the same message of containment, echoing from the darkness. This wasn't the only one. We had stumbled upon not just a single, terrifying secret, but a network of them. A series of warnings, scattered across the globe, waiting in silence. A legacy of fear, left by an unknown ancestor. Our work was not over. It had just begun.